Welcome to Hollywood Secrets Information. In this video, we are going behind the glamorous curtain of Hollywood's golden age to revisit 10 legendary actresses whose public images were often very different from the stories surrounding their private lives and professional relationships. From shocking feuds and controlling behavior to complicated personal choices and controversial reputations, these women were far more complicated than the polished stars audiences saw on screen. But were they really as terrible as some stories suggest? Or were Hollywood, the press, and time themselves responsible for creating these darker legends? Stay with us as we separate documented history from Hollywood mythology. 1. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford remains one of Hollywood's most fascinating contradictions. She built an extraordinary career from difficult beginnings and became one of MGM's biggest stars before reinventing herself as a serious dramatic actress. To millions of fans, Crawford represented determination, glamour, and the American dream. But behind that image was a reputation for being intensely ambitious, demanding, and sometimes ruthless in her professional relationships. Former colleagues and biographers frequently described her as highly controlling about her career and extremely conscious of her public image. Crawford fought hard for better roles and greater power in an industry where actresses were often controlled by studios, and that determination could make her difficult to work with. Her reputation became even darker after the publication of Christina Crawford's memoir, Mommy Dearest, which portrayed Joan as a terrifying and abusive mother. The book became enormously influential and eventually inspired the famous 1981 film, but the allegations have also been disputed by Joan's other children and questioned by some biographers. That distinction is important because the popular image of Crawford today is heavily influenced by a story whose details remain contested. What is much easier to establish is that Crawford was fiercely ambitious, extraordinarily image-conscious, and capable of intense personal and professional conflicts. The woman behind the glamorous Hollywood portrait was therefore not simply the villain or the saint. She was a complicated performer who fought aggressively for control in an unforgiving industry, and whose legacy became permanently shaped by one of Hollywood's most controversial family stories. 2. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe is perhaps the greatest example of how Hollywood can transform a complicated human being into a permanent fantasy. Her image today is almost universally associated with beauty, innocence, vulnerability, and tragic glamour. But Monroe herself was much more ambitious and intellectually serious than the stereotype suggests. She became increasingly frustrated with the way studios and producers treated her as a product rather than an artist. Her decision to help establish Marilyn Monroe Productions demonstrated that she wanted greater control over her career, and she challenged the studio system at a time when few actresses could do so successfully. Yet her personal life was filled with instability, difficult relationships, professional conflicts, and intense pressure from the media. Her behavior could sometimes be unpredictable, particularly during periods when her personal struggles affected film productions. Directors and co-stars occasionally complained about delays or difficulties working with her. At the same time, others defended her and recognized that the Hollywood system itself contributed heavily to her problems. This is where the darker version of Marilyn becomes complicated. Was she an irresponsible star who made everyone around her miserable? Or was she a talented woman struggling inside a machine that demanded perfection while denying her control? The historical record suggests elements of both professional difficulty and genuine vulnerability. But many sensational stories about Monroe have grown far beyond what can actually be proven. Her tragic death also encouraged decades of conspiracy theories and exaggerated claims. So perhaps the biggest deception was not that audiences liked Marilyn Monroe. It was that Hollywood convinced audiences they understood her. The real Monroe was ambitious, insecure, intelligent, demanding, talented, and deeply complicated. 3. Marlene Dietrich. Marlene Dietrich created one of the most powerful images in classic cinema. With her tuxedos, glamorous costumes, distinctive voice, and unforgettable screen presence, she became a symbol of sophistication and independence. But Dietrich was also known for being fiercely controlling about her image and career. She understood the power of celebrity long before modern stars turned personal branding into an industry. Dietrich carefully managed photographs, interviews, costumes, and public appearances, and she was reportedly capable of being extremely demanding when it came to maintaining her standards. Her private life was also surrounded by stories of numerous romantic relationships, although many details have been embellished by Hollywood gossip over the decades. One aspect of Dietrich's legacy that deserves greater attention is her political and humanitarian position during the rise of Nazi Germany. She strongly opposed the Nazi regime, rejected opportunities to work in Germany, became an American citizen, and supported Allied forces during World War II. Yet, even someone admired for courage can have contradictions. Her relationships and private behavior were far less conventional than the respectable image expected from female stars of her era. Dietrich also understood that controversy could coexist with glamour. She deliberately challenged traditional ideas about femininity, sexuality, and appearance. That made her fascinating to audiences, but threatening to more conservative observers. Calling Dietrich disgusting simply because she refused to behave according to conventional expectations would be historically unfair. However, the darker stories surrounding her remind us that the glamorous image was carefully constructed. Dietrich was not the innocent, effortless goddess presented by publicity departments. She was an intelligent, calculating, independent performer who understood exactly how much power an image could provide, and how aggressively that image sometimes had to be protected. For Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor became famous so young that the world watched almost her entire life unfold in public. She was celebrated for extraordinary beauty, legendary performances, and a screen presence that made her one of Hollywood's biggest stars. But her private life was also a constant source of controversy. Her multiple marriages, highly publicized relationships, and especially her relationship with Richard Burton became international entertainment news. Critics accused Taylor of being selfish, scandalous, or obsessed with fame, while tabloids turned her personal relationships into a seemingly endless spectacle. Yet the reality was more complicated. Taylor was not simply a passive celebrity caught in scandals. She was a remarkably strong businesswoman who eventually gained significant control over her career and negotiated major financial deals. She also became a major humanitarian figure through her work raising awareness and money for HIV/AIDS research and treatment. That later chapter of her life dramatically changed the way many people viewed her. Still, there were genuine contradictions. Taylor could be emotionally intense, fiercely outspoken, and difficult in relationships. Her turbulent romance with Burton produced both passionate affection and destructive conflict, and the press followed every development. The public often wanted a simple explanation. Either Taylor was a glamorous victim or a selfish Hollywood diva. Neither description captures the whole woman. She could be generous and difficult, vulnerable and powerful, loving and impulsive. The most misleading part of her golden age image was the idea that a beautiful actress had to fit neatly into a particular moral category. Taylor refused to do that. Her life was messy, public, ambitious, and sometimes controversial. But her later humanitarian work demonstrated that her legacy could not be reduced to her marriages or tabloid headlines. 5. Joan Fontaine. Joan Fontaine was famous for portraying vulnerable, elegant, and emotionally complicated women, particularly in Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca and Suspicion. Off-screen, however, her reputation became closely connected to one of Hollywood's most famous sibling rivalries. Her relationship with her older sister, Olivia de Havilland. The two sisters became successful actresses at roughly the same time, and competition between them reportedly created a lifelong emotional distance. Their relationship has been described through many different versions, with journalists and biographers sometimes portraying them as bitter enemies. Fontaine herself contributed to that mythology through statements that suggested deep resentment and competition. Yet it is important not to turn a complicated family relationship into a cartoon villain story. Both sisters were ambitious women working in an industry that constantly compared female performers with one another. Hollywood publicity also had an incentive to exaggerate rivalries because audiences loved the idea of glamorous sisters fighting for supremacy. Fontaine herself was not simply a victim of this narrative. She could be outspoken and reportedly had a strong personality, particularly when discussing her career and family. Her public comments sometimes reignited interest in the feud. But behind the headlines was a much more ordinary human story. Two talented sisters who achieved enormous success while struggling to maintain a healthy relationship. Fontaine's legacy is therefore less about being disgusting and more about the uncomfortable reality that fame can intensify family competition. Her elegant screen persona concealed a woman who could be proud, competitive, sensitive, and outspoken. And perhaps the most revealing lesson is that Hollywood audiences often wanted these women to be either perfect stars or terrible people, when the truth was usually somewhere in between. 6. Olivia de Havilland. Olivia de Havilland's public image was that of an elegant, respectable Hollywood actress, but behind that refined appearance was one of the strongest fighters for artistic freedom in the studio era. De Havilland became famous for films such as Gone with the Wind and later won 2 Academy Awards. Her greatest battle, however, was not with another actress. It was with the Hollywood studio system itself. Warner Brothers expected performers to accept long-term contracts and could effectively control their careers. De Havilland challenged that system and eventually won a landmark legal victory that helped limit the power studios had over contracted actors. Her determination was admirable, but it also contributed to a reputation for being stubborn and difficult when she believed her rights were being violated. Her relationship with her sister Joan Fontaine became another source of public fascination. Both women became successful actresses, yet their relationship was reportedly strained for decades. Fontaine's public comments about their rivalry helped fuel the image of two sisters locked in an endless battle. But de Havilland's story becomes especially interesting when viewed against the expectations placed on women in classic Hollywood. A female star who quietly obeyed the studio could be considered professional, while a woman demanding creative control could quickly be labeled difficult. De Havilland refused to accept that system. That does not mean every criticism of her personality was false, but it does mean her difficult woman reputation needs context. She was ambitious, disciplined, and willing to fight powerful institutions. Her glamorous image may have hidden a tough personality, but toughness is not necessarily cruelty. In fact, her willingness to challenge Hollywood helped change the industry for generations of performers. 7. Judy Garland. Judy Garland's story is one of the saddest contradictions of Hollywood's golden age. Audiences knew her as the warm, talented star of The Wizard of Oz, but behind the cheerful image was a performer subjected to enormous pressure from the studio system. Garland was pushed to work intensely from a young age, and studio-controlled diets, medication, and exhausting production schedules contributed to serious problems later in her life. Her struggles with substance dependence, depression, financial instability, and turbulent relationships became public knowledge. Because of this, Garland was sometimes portrayed as unreliable or difficult. Film productions could be affected by her struggles, and her personal life became a favorite subject for the tabloids. But describing Garland simply as a troublesome celebrity ignores the environment that helped create those problems. She was a child performer whose appearance, weight, schedule, and behavior were heavily managed by adults and studio executives. As she grew older, she struggled to escape the expectations created around the young girl who had played Dorothy. Garland could certainly be unpredictable, and those close to her experienced the consequences of her personal difficulties. But her story is also a warning about the darker side of the entertainment industry. The same machine that created the beloved Judy Garland helped push her toward exhaustion and instability. Calling her disgusting, therefore, misses the point. Her story is much more tragic than that. She was an extraordinarily gifted performer whose enormous talent survived despite tremendous personal struggles. The contrast between the smiling girl audiences remembered and the troubled adult she became reveals just how much Hollywood could demand from its stars, and how little protection it sometimes offered them. 8. Ginger Rogers. Ginger Rogers is remembered as the elegant dance partner of Fred Astaire and one of Hollywood's most successful actresses and performers. Her career lasted for decades, and she became a symbol of glamour, discipline, and professionalism. But Rogers was also known for having strong opinions and a determined personality. Her career was not simply handed to her because she danced with Astaire. She fought to establish herself as a serious actress and eventually won an Academy Award for Kitty Foyle. Her relationship with Astaire has also been surrounded by myths about rivalry and tension. The pair were highly successful together, but their professional relationship was not necessarily the effortless friendship that Hollywood publicity sometimes implied. Rogers wanted recognition for her own talents rather than being permanently defined as Astaire's partner. Her political and personal views later in life also made her controversial to some audiences. Like many stars from her generation, she became increasingly outspoken as she grew older. That outspoken personality sometimes conflicted with the sweet, elegant image audiences associated with her early career. But there is a larger lesson here. Female performers in Hollywood were frequently expected to remain charming, agreeable, and grateful. Rogers demonstrated that a woman could be glamorous while also demanding respect and independence. Some people interpreted that determination as arrogance or difficult behavior. Others saw it as professional strength. The truth was probably more complicated. Rogers could be stubborn and strong-willed, but those qualities also helped her survive an industry where actresses could easily be pushed aside. Her legacy, therefore, should not be reduced to gossip about personality. She was a talented performer who spent decades fighting to prove that she was more than half of a famous dancing partnership. 9. Greta Garbo. Greta Garbo's mysterious image may be one of the greatest publicity creations in Hollywood history. Her famous decision to withdraw from public life helped create an almost mythical reputation. She was portrayed as mysterious, distant, sophisticated, and impossible to understand. But the reality was much more human. Garbo disliked the invasive attention that came with celebrity and became increasingly protective of her privacy. Unlike many stars who depended on constant publicity, she deliberately avoided interviews and public appearances. To some people, this behavior made her seem cold or arrogant. Others saw it as a courageous refusal to allow Hollywood to consume her personal identity. Garbo could reportedly be extremely selective about the people she allowed into her private world, and her relationships were often kept away from public scrutiny. This secrecy naturally encouraged speculation. Rumors about her romantic life, friendships, personality, and motivations became part of the Garbo mythology. But rumors should not be mistaken for established facts. What we can say is that Garbo was intensely private and uncomfortable with the machinery of celebrity. Her decision to leave Hollywood while she was still famous was extraordinary. Instead of spending decades trying to remain relevant, she walked away and protected her anonymity. That choice can certainly be interpreted as aloofness, but it can also be seen as independence. The supposed cold Garbo may therefore tell us more about Hollywood's expectations than about Garbo herself. Audiences were accustomed to believing that stars belonged to them. Garbo disagreed. She wanted boundaries. And ironically, by refusing to reveal herself, she became even more fascinating. The mystery that surrounded her became one of her greatest legacies. 10. Claudette Colbert. Claudette Colbert was one of Hollywood's most successful actresses, famous for her beauty, intelligence, comedic timing, and performances in films such as It Happened One Night. Her career was built around an image of sophistication, but behind the scenes she was known for being highly particular about her work. Like many major stars of the studio era, Colbert had strong opinions about how she should be presented and photographed. She was not the type of performer who simply accepted every demand made by a studio. Her professionalism could sometimes be interpreted as being demanding, particularly in an era when studios expected stars to follow instructions. One famous part of her career involved her reluctance towards certain publicity arrangements and her desire to maintain control over how she appeared on screen. Yet again, the word difficult deserves context. Hollywood often rewarded male actors for being demanding while judging women much more harshly for the same behavior. Colbert's success demonstrated that she understood her value. She carefully selected projects and maintained a career that lasted through major changes in the film industry. Unlike some stars whose fame depended entirely on youth and glamour, Colbert successfully transitioned between dramatic and comedic roles. Her reputation was therefore not dominated by one enormous scandal, but by the broader tension between celebrity independence and studio control. She could be demanding, private, and firm about her standards, but those qualities also helped her build an impressive career. The glamorous image audiences saw was real, but incomplete. Behind it was a disciplined actress who understood exactly what she wanted from Hollywood and was prepared to protect her position. And there you have it, the darker, more complicated side of 10 legendary women from Hollywood's golden age. But perhaps the biggest lesson is that the word disgusting is often too simple for real history. These actresses were not fictional characters. They were human beings, ambitious, flawed, talented, difficult, vulnerable, powerful, and sometimes contradictory. Some stories about them are well documented, while others were created or exaggerated by Hollywood publicity and tabloids. If you enjoyed this journey behind the glamorous curtain, like this video, subscribe to Hollywood Secrets Information, and tell us in the comments which Golden Age actress surprised you the most. And if you want more forgotten scandals, hidden stories, and fascinating secrets from classic Hollywood, stay with us, because there are still plenty of stories that Hollywood never wanted you to know. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next Hollywood Secrets Information video.